Carolyn is presenting a talk on the theme of this year's Biennale of Sydney, Revolutions, Forms That Turn, and its relevance within the contemporary world, focusing on the relationship between the revolutionary moments in the history of modern art and the practices of artists today. Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev, thank you.
Thank you, Shona, for this warm welcome, and thank you all for coming here during what should be a lunch break. Before speaking specifically about the theme of this Biennale, I would like to contextualize that a moment and give you some of my thoughts on Biennale and international events today in the world dedicated to contemporary art. And from something that I often playfully refer to as the Biennale syndrome, because as you know, there are many, many, many international periodic events of contemporary art today, while there were very few up until 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. The big boom has been extremely recently. So I often think about how curatorial practice negotiates this shift of attention towards contemporary art, and specifically towards biennales, periodic international festivals of contemporary art. From a general perspective, beneath these kinds of events and festivals, exhibitions, whatever we want to call them, lie political imperatives, struggles and negotiations and transformations of a global economy of interrelated cities. The rise of these biennales has decentralized art, certainly, and has created multiple art systems, where before there were very few. It has provided a platform for artists from what we used to call the peripheral areas of the world, up until 20 years ago, to practice and enter into the conversation of contemporary art immediately. It has decreased, thus, therefore, the legitimizing powers of the old centers of art, New York, Paris, London. And this has been a very healthy world development. Artists are often actively partaking not only in their work as artists, but also in political struggles through their work. And international exhibitions such as biennales provide a platform and a location where these conversations can be articulated. At the same time, however, the new emerging network of biennales is also, from other perspectives, quite disempowering for an art world accustomed to being avant-garde and underground. Indeed, I believe it is one of the causes behind the weakening of other alternative forms of artistic self-organization. The artist-run space, the apartment art in Moscow before Glasnost, and so on, which now risk being accused of elitism alongside the new public success and in contrast to the new public success of contemporary art that is absolutely breathtaking and of which the Biennale is a part. Thus, it is a form of success that tends to marginalize some of the more refined and serious artistic research, which, oddly enough, after having been underground for so long, is accused of elitism. So basically, we need to deal, I think, as curators and artists, with the pro and the con of cultural populism, and with the confusion that today exists between the notion of democratization of art on the one hand and cultural populism on the other. And these two, I do not believe, are synonymous at all. The accelerated increase of these Biennale events since the early 1990s runs parallel to the rise of the internet and to the multiplication of art fairs as well, and generally to the prominence of something called contemporary art, which people who are not involved in the field now discuss openly and on their daily life as a sort of a shared idea of society. there is an impulse to turn art into something very visible, very consumable, very accessible, and the word access and accessibility is a key word of the internet society, into somehow the highest form of popular culture, in contrast with television and other forms of popular culture. Art becomes the ultimate object of communication, to be communicated. Art is to be communicated at a time when communication itself has become the ultimate object of consumer culture. Communication itself is what's being communicated in communication. We are in a Google scanning and Wikipedia age where knowledge is readily available, thank goodness, and I often do click onto Wikipedia for quick reminders or things that I simply don't know about. And yet, and this is a positive, very positive development of the collaborative nature of the net. But yet, for the same reasons, this is a form of often very superficial knowledge. And the people who are uploading now onto Wikipedia are people who did not have Wikipedia when they were young. My question is, what happens when we go to the next generation that uses Wikipedia? Who will be uploading onto Wikipedia? There are more than 100 biennales in the world today, and every city seems to be planning one. My last count was 104. As the phenomenon grows around the world, it's also increasingly fashionable, however, in Western circles to criticize these new biennales, saving only the oldest and thus the doc, the oldies but goodies, to borrow the doc, a term from Italian wine industry, denominazione di origine controllata. So the denominazione di origine controllata biennales are, of course, the oldest ones: Venice, 1895, Carnegie International, Pittsburgh, 1897, Documenta Castle, I believe 53 or 55, Sao Paulo Biennale 53, 55, and finally Sydney, 1973, the youngest of the old biennales and the newest of the period of decentralization of art, foregrounding and spearheading the birth of all of the other subsequent biennales and triennials in the Asia-Pacific region. Mostly developing in the 1990s, and curiously enough, for example, the Gwangju Biennale began as a direct consequence of a revolution. It was after the Korean uprisings, and the artist Nam June Paik wanted Korea, and specifically Gwangju, where there had been the uprisings of the farmers, to have an art exhibition. And now we have, of course, the latest biennale to emerge is the at least up to last week, was Singapore, which will be opening its second edition in September. So the same people who criticize the Biennale syndrome in Western circles rarely criticize the rise, however, of the art fairs and the auction houses that has run parallel to this rise of biennales, with every big city in the world attempting to become a center also of the art market. But there's just so many collectors around, so I'm not so sure that that will be able to develop as quickly and as much as the biennales that have private and public funding and that are connected more to the history of exhibitions than the art fairs are. Indeed, since the mid-1980s, when Arco Madrid set up special programs like lectures and conferences during the art fair and then curated programs, art fairs are competing directly with biennales for cultural prominence as global platforms for contemporary art. And indeed, people were comparing the last Basel art fair to the last Biennale of Venice, and the boundaries are blurring in some instances. However, I think that it is very important to notice that the art fair model is also eroding the singularity of the curated exhibition and the individual curator's ability to hypothesize and construct knowledge. So again, something which seems in a way conservative, the idea of an individual, elaborating a a singular point of view on a moment or on history that may sound conservative, I fear that today it is one of the most radical and non-conservative things that we can do in an age where the idea of collaborative knowledge has become a product and is being vehicled as a product. In games, for example, shareware in games. So, on the one hand, we have this situation of growing art fairs, on the other, this situation of growing biennales, but also biennales at a risk of losing that individuality of a moment when someone brings together work from all over the world and projects a view on how knowledge is constructed. So we have a contradictory movement, a healthy decentralization of the art world. However, also within the biennales, the success of the biennales is moving biennales to be curated exhibitions about thematic focuses that are not artistic focuses in the immediate and first instance. Because when you need to be very successful and have a very large audience, the topic that you address in terms of the title or the theme that the Biennale addresses is more apt to be successful if it is something that people read about in their daily newspapers, in their daily life. Therefore, most biennales today are curated around themes that are very relevant in terms of daily life. For example, political struggles, ecology. The last Sharjah Biennale was about ecology, conflicts in border zones, justice or injustice, things that can latch on to the imaginary system of all the viewers and be addressed and discussed within that. So I believe that that is problematic because there is a politics of aesthetics, and the politics of aesthetics means that art expresses itself through language, the language of art, which is visual, sensorial, perceptual, and it is not about whether the artist is painting a flower pot or a battle scene. It doesn't matter. The actual content or the level of content of an artwork may or may not be extremely closing of the sense of emancipation of the individual, independently of whether it is vehicling a content which one finds progressive or not progressive in society. Because the way that art works is it shapes consciousness, and consciousness then shapes the world. So we are not the activists. We are the people who engage and involve in the shaping of consciousness. And it's not because Shakespeare criticized the power of his time that he was a great playwright. He's a great playwright, and he included certain very major forms of criticism that then became meaningful to the leaders of his society and to the society at large. This is my point of view on the relationship between art and society. Indeed, there is currently a sort of loss of intellectual freedom, and a loss of a freedom of being part of revolutionary avant-gardes rather than being part of a mainstream culture that goes along with the success of exhibition making. And there is a surprising amnesia of linguistic awareness, a loss of the awareness that language itself is political, as Malcolm X aptly put it in his autobiography. Because a broad audience has to understand contemporary art, the crucial nature of contemporary art is denied. The ability to break paradigms, to raise questions as opposed to answer them, to break language as opposed to use it, to contradict consensus as opposed to make consensus, to be radically other from the society in which it is, from which it emerges, and which it is embedded, to create and experiment different ways of presenting itself. We are now at a strange moment in the history of art where the old content versus form divide has reappeared. This exhibition is called Revolutions, Forms That Turn. In a way, I played a game because the first word of the title, Revolutions, suggests again yet another biennale which is totally content-based, and it's going to show us videos about revolutions around the world made by people that happen to be artists and not filmmakers or documentary CNN people. No. This exhibition actually engages with the etymology of the word revolutions. Volvere, to turn, and revolvere, to turn again. So actually it is an investigation of the formal gestures embedded within the word revolutions. It is not an illustration of revolutions. It explores the impulse to revolt, which is an artistic impulse. I think it's a human impulse. It's an impulse that is at the basis of a normal development of any individual when they're children, to put your hands in the feces, to touch it and smear it on the wall, maybe. To understand to what degree you are punished if you break something, and how to negotiate forms of freedom even though you are submitted to these forms of social control, first in the family and then in the society at large. And any healthy individual has to learn to deal with parking tickets that way. So the impulse to park illegally, the impulse to revolt, and when and why we do so and choose to take a risk. It explores the gestures that are embedded in the word. So what does it mean to revolve, to have something revolve around a space? What does it mean to rotate, on the other hand, to turn on itself, something that turns on itself? What is a mirror image? What does it mean to look in a mirror and see a reversed, a revolutionized, a reversed image, to see the left on the right and the right on the left? And the relationship between the mirror image is, of course, a broad psychoanalytic subject through Lacan and many post-Lacanians, of course, but it's also a mythical subject if one goes all the way back to yes, clearly indicated by Paolini's work downstairs with the fragments of a third image, which is the fragments of the two images looking at each other, of the two figures, by Giulio Paolini. So repeating, again, is a very important formal gesture, which I explore in this exhibition. What does it mean to repeat something? And indeed, is it possible to repeat? Because when you repeat, even the most exact repetition, the context around that is different. So when Jeremy Deller repeats the strike of the Orgrave in the early 80s, one of the last moments of the strong labor movement during the beginning of the Thatcher period, and he repeats that with the same people who took part in that strike, you are, of course, are not in a repetition, A, because the people have aged and they have gray hair, so there's something a bit strange in this strike, and B, because the world around us is no longer Thatcher, the beginning of the Thatcher period. So repetition is actually impossible. So I'm not a postmodernist at all. I don't think that I don't think that it's possible to not be original. I think it's impossible to not be original in terms of the definition of postmodernism as the end of originality and the end of newness. In other ways, I am, of course, greatly indebted to postmodernist cultural theory, for example, in its post-colonial declensions and so on, which is a different aspect of postmodernist theory. Another gesture that I explore in this exhibition is reversing. You know, what does it mean to reverse something, to go backwards? And again, what does it mean to turn something upside down? How does one relate to that? And again, what does it mean to turn something inside out? And is that possible beyond a Möbius strip? I think it's not, because of course if you turn something inside out, the outside is inside and the inside is outside, so you haven't done anything except for shift the inside and the outside. And so on and so forth. Ultimately, what I'm interested in is what all art, I think, is hinged upon, which is to change perspectives, to change point of view. So ultimately, one of the other and last formal gestures would be that of making a revolutionary artwork. So something that spins and completely turns your idea of what art can be or is. So it's a formal gesture that happens in the mind of the viewer.